I'm easy otherwise. You find
You
it
stole
out.
the mic.
There's another way, isn't it?
Yeah, but I don't know if it's going to work.
Sorry.
So we teach people how to be better public speakers all the time. There's quite a bit on the internet if you've ever wanted to learn how to be a better public speaker. So why don't we tell people how to be better public listeners? You see, as a speaker, no matter how much I pace up and down my hotel room, practicing my presentation the day before a conference, there is one thing I can't control, and that's the audience. I don't know what sort of interaction or feedback I'm going to get from them. And here's the secret. The feedback and the interaction that we get from an audience as we speak is the energy that we feed off. To know that you're connected to our content and you're interested in what we're talking about energizes us, and it helps us to deliver a better presentation. So here's a few tips that I want you to consider the next time you're going to a conference, especially a bigger event. Before the session, contact the speaker online. Now I don't mean go through Facebook, find the photo that they forgot to mark as private and ask them about their children. That's a little bit creepy. But speakers like me have really big public profiles online with lots of public ways you can contact me, like Twitter or a LinkedIn message. And it's really great for me to see in my inbox or my DMs a message from someone saying, "Hi, I heard you're speaking at the conference that's coming up. I'm really excited to listen to your talk." It's even better if you tell me a couple of things that you're expecting or that you'd like to hear in that talk, because chances are I haven't even written the slide deck yet. That's really good. Add the session to your agenda. This is important to the organisers because it helps them put the more popular sessions in the bigger rooms and the less popular sessions in the little rooms. Helps us avoid speaking to 20 people in a room designed for 500. And it also avoids us trying to cram people in and you missing out on a seat, because we put it in a small room, but it's actually a really popular session. What it also does is it helps the speaker to craft their talk. Am I speaking to a smaller group of 50 people, or am I speaking to 800? That's going to have an impact on the design of my talk. Say hello to your speaker at the beginning of the session. This sounds a little bit weird, but what I found is speakers cope with nerves in one of two ways. They either hide out of sight, maybe with the AV team, and they don't want to be seen until they make the grand entrance on stage, or they'll come and spend some time in the front rows, they'll talk to people in the room, or I even sometimes go and stand at the entrance door where your barcode's being scanned and say hi to people as they come in. That's a really good sign that my way of dealing with nerves and breaking the tension with the audience is to start that interaction, so don't be scared. Say hi if people are out there. During the session, I'm not going to be the speaker who tells you to put away your phone, because I'm addicted to my phone. When I'm in the audience, I use it for two things. I'm usually tweeting out a storm on the conference hashtag about cool things that the speaker has said and giving them free PR, or I'm writing things down in OneNote about what you've said that I'm going to go away and do later. My phone is a tool for me when I'm in the audience. If you have your phone out when someone is speaking, give us a few little non-verbal clues that you're actually with us and you're not just playing Candy Crush. Don't stare at your phone the whole session. It's really nice occasionally to look up and smile and nod and agree that, yeah, you're following me and you're with me. That eye contact thing, it's actually really important, and speakers are trained to look around the room as they speak. We do that so that we can connect with different people, and you don't think I'm just talking to the very important people in the front row here, because you get a bit annoyed with that. So we look around the audience in different parts of the room and we make eye contact. We're not a threat. It's okay to maintain that eye contact for a second and even smile and nod again. Those non-verbal clues that we are listening and we are enjoying the talk are really helpful to your speaker. Raise your hand. I hate doing this in the audience. It is not my comfort zone at all. Speakers ask you to do it for a couple of reasons. One, it helps us craft our talking points based on the feedback we get from the audience. I don't know who you are. I don't know what your job role is, how much experience you've got. If I throw some questions like that at you, I can craft what I'm saying based on who's in the room, and I get to learn a little bit more about you. But there's a really cool side effect. It's proven that if you do a physical action in conjunction with learning something new, you'll actually retain it better. So it helps you to learn stuff and keep it in your memory as well. The other thing it does is it gives our brains a break from listening to a 60-minute monologue with no interaction. It wakes your brain up to have to answer a question and actually do something about it. After the session, ask questions, but not those questions. And you know the questions I mean. The questions go something like this. So in my organisation, we have this thing here that's specifically set up like this, and when we go and do that specific thing, we get that error. Why is it not working? That is not helpful to anybody in the room except you. When you're asking a question, if you get a chance to do it during the session, I want you to ask yourself first, is this going to be valuable to anybody else in the room other than me? Ask those questions. They're helpful. And finally, session feedback and evaluations. Logging onto a speaker portal and reading your evaluations is like reading the comments on Reddit. It is terrifying. So, when you're filling in speaker feedback, I want you to put yourself in the position of coach. Here I've got my famous All Blacks rugby coach, greatest rugby team in the world. Don't be critical, but be specific. Speakers generally want to get better. We want to know how we can improve this talk to make it better the next time. And so feedback like, the slides were terrible, that was a really boring session, and I'm not kidding, I got this one. We ran out of potato chips.
Right.
On my individual session, yeah, I don't know. Feedback like, I found your slides hard to read because the font was too small. Or the demo text size was too small. Or I was expecting to see XYZ because of the abstract and you didn't include it. That kind of feedback is helpful. Now you're a coach. Because at the end of the day, as a speaker, I rock up into offices like this, and this is a little daunting, even to somebody who gets paid to do it. And your participation and your feedback makes the difference between me going, yeah, that was pretty cool. I'm happy to come back and do that again. I enjoy my work, versus me turning around and saying, I'm never, ever doing that again. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Sonia. Head of Engineering at Octopus Deploy. He's going to talk to us about how everyone is a second-class citizen, otherwise known as Paul. Please join me in welcoming Mike.
I'll talk in this sucker. So you can tell that I am not a professional presenter because I don't have a clicky thing. So I apologise, I have to go down there and push my button every once in a while. Not my button, the computer's button. So what I find is I do a lot of presentations because we work remotely across Zoom, right? So I don't need a little clicky thing, I just get to hide behind my computer and the rest of the internet before I talk to people. Now I'm face to face with you lot and I don't know what to do. So my talk is about everybody as a second-class citizen. Well, when Octopus started in 2011, it was just Paul. So was he a first-class citizen, was he second-class? He was just Paul, he did what he wanted, he made a great product, and I get to work in that company now. So one day, it was everyone is Paul except for Nick. And I'm going to say, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. There's a lot of other names and faces that would go into telling the truth, but as Michael always says, that just gets in the way. So everybody's Paul except, of course, for Nick. So now who's a second-class citizen in their relationship? And then later on it was everybody is in Brisbane, but then we hired somebody else and now everybody's in Brisbane except for Matt, who's in Melbourne. And then everybody's in Australia for a while because that just felt like, yeah, everybody's Australian, that's great. Except for Del Nero, who we hired before Matt, but it makes for a good story. He's over in Argentina, so now not everybody's in Australia. And there is this sense of when you're working together in a company like Octopus on a product like that, you really do want to feel like you're doing it together without excluding people. So what we found was that as we grew and transitioned into, I guess, working from home a lot, because we were hiring people across Australia, is that we have one of those discussions up on the whiteboard. You know, we're just about to ship Octopus 3, done a bunch of really big architectural changes about when I joined. And yeah, we jump up there and we whiteboard something out, and 10 minutes later you had a really great decision, race back to your computer, code away for 2 hours, push it to master, get back up and go whiteboard the next problem, because that's the kind of problems we were solving around that time. Whereas you fast forward to now, that doesn't really happen anymore, because the problems we're solving take weeks to figure out the answer to, not minutes. So whiteboards aren't a problem for us anymore, but what we did find was that we'd jump up on the whiteboard and start writing something and then realise Matt is in Melbourne on his computer across the internet and can't see the whiteboard because we never called him, we didn't tell him we were having a meeting. So we thought, yeah, let's do the right thing, we'll call him and point the camera at the whiteboard. And so he's squinting and we're moving the camera closer and closer to the whiteboard, and then he's like, I can't see the other bit, and it really did feel like that. So what we did was we said that, well, Matt's a second-class citizen, but everybody else feels like they're first-class citizens. And so we thought that if we were going to continue to grow that way, it's about time we switched the gears and said, why don't we try making everybody a second-class citizen? Sounds like a good idea. It was a good idea at the time. We did things like we locked the Octopus office and nobody could actually get in, so we were all sort of forced to work from home for a month. And it was just that moment where we realised we had to pull the Band-Aid off, because it was easier to rip out a quick meeting with a few people and realise you'd isolated a whole bunch of others that really cared about what you were doing. So we kind of went, okay, no, everyone's a second-class citizen, but let's do it in a first-class way. You can imagine the t-shirt, can't you? It's like, what does that say? And that kind of worked for a bit, because we were kind of like, okay, let's get all this stuff lined up right. Let's really try to get everybody on a fairly even keel, but do it as good as we can. And, good thing. So what we've done is slowly but surely, given time, iterated to a point where we really do believe everybody's a first-class citizen at Octopus. That took a bit of effort. And some of the things I've learned, and they all start with T, go me, the professional presenter. The first thing I noticed at Octopus is we do start from trust. When we hire you at Octopus and you finally come in the door, we pretty much trust you with the keys to the kingdom on day one. But what we're doing there is we're saying we trust you this much to do that kind of work. We also ask you to be responsible with it. So trust I feel like these things are going to cut you down and undermine your ability to do remote work if you can't have these in place. So trust is one of the ones. Team, okay, you want to feel like you're working as a team. You also want to hire the right people into your team. What I've noticed is that when people, regardless of where they are, every one of our teams, so they're up to about 6 people, every one of them has a bunch of people here in Brisbane, but every one of them has people in other parts of the world. And while you're working on the same thing, it actually breaks down a lot of those barriers. Which part of the world am I in? What time zone am I in? No, we're all in this together doing the same kind of thing, aiming for the same goal. Another thing is transparency. Once you start to go remote, a lot of the little cues that you get from being in a room or working with people, they're gone. And so you become very transactional. And the reason I put transparency there is because you've got to think about, I'm in the executive level at Octopus, and that means I've got to be so clear about what I communicate and careful about what I miscommunicate. Because for some people, they can think my job's on the line because there's some message in Slack, and you realise that wasn't great. So transparency from leadership is super, super important. Tooling feels like it's pretty obvious, but tooling these days is so much better than it was 4 years ago when we really started this. So that's come a long way, but tooling is critical. If you don't have that in place, you're stuck. Tuning. I'm a musician. I'm a pretender musician. I play music all the time. But one of the things I've noticed is when you play music and other musicians are out of tune, you don't work all that great, okay? And so what I find is that when we spend time getting our tuning right, everything sounds better. But without tuning right, you're pretty screwed. And so what I mean by tuning there is just taking time to talk about culture, taking time to reinforce it, taking time to reinforce it again, and reminding everybody we can uphold this and do it better and improve over time. So that's what I'm talking about tuning there. And the last one is time. It's taken us 4 years since I started to really, we did remote work when it was just Paul, okay, did it perfectly, you couldn't question it. Everybody was a first class citizen then, but as we've gone through these transitionary stages, it kind of takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of learning, and a lot of the lessons we learned because we made a lot of mistakes. You can read blog posts where you're blue in the face and kind of go, that's the way we're going to do it, but I've found personally you're so much better off learning organically and then just measuring it against other things you're seeing in the world. It's a bit of a way to say, it doesn't sound like it makes sense, but make the decisions for you, your team, your context as you go, giving it time. So I'd like to finish my presentation by saying right now, everybody at Octopus is on planet Earth. Well, maybe not for long. Thank you very much.
Rob Dawson, talking to us about helping a remote-first geo-distributed team to succeed. Please join me in welcoming Rob.
So first of all, maybe I should start with a question. I think that's what we're meant to do, right? So who works remote currently? Cool. Keep your hands up for those that have their hands up. Who works remote and they think their company does it well? Cool. Okay. So I'm going to start with 3 stories. So I've done the remote 3 times. I'm on my 3rd swing at it at the moment. I'm either a masochist or enjoy it, I'm not sure. After the first time, actually, I think I might have been a bit of a masochist the 2nd time, but after the 2nd one and the one I'm in now, I'm really enjoying. The first one, it was with a UK financial company. Pretty much everything Mike said about how not to do it is how it was. So I was the 3rd person to join that was remote. The first 2 people were all people that were relocated from the UK. And so they all had the team culture, they knew how everything worked. It was really hard for me to break into the team, even though like one of the guys I've worked with for like 5 years beforehand. And so it was kind of that challenge there. The other thing that they did that was really wrong, and they're like, everything's wrong. So the other thing they did wrong was, well, to start with, they were still on Subversion. I mean, Git was a thing that was new at the time, but they were still on Subversion. Working with Subversion remote was just awful. And it was hosted on their internal servers. I had to VPN in to get access to it. The fact that the main team was all in London meant that there was no way to actually ever talk with anyone sort of remote because they're overlapping time zones. We had one hour a week where we sort of overlapped and met with people. The one thing they got right was getting the remote people on site to get some face-to-face time. The next one was a Sydney-based education company. They were way better. The tooling that they had was GitHub-based, so everyone's a 2nd-class citizen or a 1st-class citizen, depending on your perspective. The code was all remote, everything was hosted remote. It made the tooling was way better. The culture was mostly remote first, and so people were kind of encouraged to be in Sydney if they could. There was still sort of that office thing. People who were based in Sydney were the 1st-class citizens. So now my 3rd go at it with Pegasus and Consensus, it's even better. And so I'm really enjoying it. And a lot of the good things that I'll talk about in the next couple of slides are based on what we're doing now. And I know there's people here that I work with that are going to call bluff. But that's the way we go. So I think just the 3 big things. So remote first. Is it actually really remote first? Like, is it remote first, or is it kind of you've got the people who work in the office or in offices are the 1st-class people? How inclusive are you of the remote people? What's the percentage of remote versus face-to-face? Then the little things. So one of the cool things that the Sydney Education Company did was they did like some of the celebrations. They'd say, okay, we're going to have a party in the office. We're all going to send you vouchers for you to go down to the coffee shop and buy stuff. So I guess it's trying to do those things of how do you build like a culture that celebrates things and enjoys things just as well for the remote people as the people that are in the office. We did a post-release, so we're still working out how to get that right. It's hard, particularly once you start throwing in different time zones. So we did like a release party that was have a drink whatever the time appropriate drink is, and we all dialed into Zoom together and just kind of hung out for half an hour. And it's not perfect, but it's something. I mean, it's trying to find out those ways to celebrate things together. Tools. And so I think the questions of where does the source code live? What tools do you use for, I guess, creating issues? Are you using like some sort of shared Jira that's like publicly available? Do you have to VPN into some sort of network? Like should be no, I think, for probably most people, even if you're working inside an environment. Where's your build infrastructure? What sort of communication tools do you have? So for us, the things that I've seen work well, so your GitHub or Bitbucket or something that's hosted for your source code, using Slack heavily. Who doesn't? Who uses Slack? Maybe is the way to phrase it. Yeah, okay. So Slack, I think most of us have a love-hate relationship with Slack. And you hate all the different channels and proliferation of stuff, but it is actually such a better way than it was before for remote. I think using your issue tracking sort of tools somewhere on the cloud that you can have things. And the other thing that has been like most awesome in my third swing at it has been Zoom. So Zoom is, I don't know, I spend too much of my life in Zoom, so I have, again, a love-hate relationship with Zoom, but I think it just, the ease of communicating with people through Zoom and video just makes such a difference to actually being able to communicate. And so in some ways, like with all of the Zoom calls we do, where even though we're remote and not seeing each other, in some ways you actually are seeing each other more because you're seeing like inside people's houses and like sharing life with people a lot more. So people know that my kids are now homeschooled because they see them sometimes running around during the day. It's like, yeah. The third thing to throw into the mix that's the hardest one. Yeah, I have a clicker. Why am I like? So this is where I'm showing like I'm really not professional. I went as far as to ask for a clicker and then. So a time scroller on a Mac, sort of old school app. You see the green means that it's a good time to have a meeting. Red means it's orange is sort of red, green, amber, standard things. So I took that when I was studiously preparing these slides well in advance at 12:30 today. And just to say, oh well, maybe you're just picking the time that makes Brisbane look good, and this is like the worst possible time. Well, okay, let's flip it. So 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Brisbane's kind of orangey green. Most of the rest is red. Europe starts to be green. What's it like in the morning? It's actually a normal business day for Brisbane. It kind of rubbish for Europe. So I think the answer for time zones, the best answer that we've got at the moment is, so we do agile development, we have scrum teams. The scrum teams we try and time zone align. And so it sounds obvious. We worked out that this is really, really important the hard way by not, and having a team that kind of blew up and didn't work. The other thing is, that really helps with time zones is Aussies are actually pretty good at being flexible. And so we for the most part, are saying, this is awesome that we get to work remote. We'll do some of those early mornings and maybe some of the late nights and time shift around to make it work. And that's awesome. I think the key thing to try and do if you're doing that, though, is encouraging people to actually do the proper flexible sort of work, because it's way too easy to kind of start at 6 o'clock because you had a phone call and then kind of keep on going, and then you kind of say hi to your family and then keep on going again till like 10 o'clock. And I guess the challenge really in that sort of remote thing there is just to make sure that people do get time off. And that's me done.
Tell us about comms culture in remote work. Please join me in welcoming her.
Hello friends. Yes, I'm Sammy. This is my big face. You can find me on the Twitters with this face. So I'm at the Pivots. Our entire team works remotely, and a few of them are here tonight. And I look after their people and community. So I'm going to talk a little bit about cultural things here to give you some insights. But very similar to Mike. Oh, this doesn't work, Loren. Oh wait, okay, it does. Error. Very similar to Mike, I love that you identified that, yeah, you need radical trust and radical transparency to make remote work. And I'm just talking to a few people in the crowd tonight, people who are, companies who are considering doing this. The trust piece is the piece that is usually the part where they're a bit nervous about. And I think that's what makes 6pivot and Octopus Deploy really special, is because they have these two components. They have the radical transparency with their team. You had Mike telling you earlier. 6pivot, even in my interview process with Faith, was radically transparent. I even said to, I think, Loren later, Faith told me some things I don't think she should have told me. I haven't even joined the company yet. So that radical transparency permeated even through the interview process and is deeply ingrained in the culture throughout. Likewise with trust, the trust that you have to give trust to a remote team. They have to have ownership. They can't be micromanaged, and these all come hand in hand. But these things, they should be a given. I believe in remote work, but the things that underpin that, I think, are great comms. And great comms underpin everything in every company, I believe, but it's kind of critical in a remote company because you rely on communication via all of those tools. So I'm going to dive into this kind of more on a remote aspect, but this applies to every company. I do believe that every company should focus on their communication skills. So the reason this is specific for remote teams is, have you seen this when you drive around to the valley? I love it because the more I think about it, the bigger it gets. Is imperative in a remote team. So if you're all working at home by yourself, if you have a minor problem and you just think about it all the time by yourself, it's going to continue getting bigger and bigger. So every time I drive past this, I love it. And this is never more prevalent in a remote team. So we need to be conscious of that, and we need to combat this with great comms. So different types of comms, or the tools that we're using. So in remote teams, of course we're using Slack most likely, and that will be messaging, right? And so this is quite thoughtful messages. This is things that you can go back and look at. It's not like in an office and you go, hey, how's this going? It's quite intent when you write something. You can scroll back and look at it. Likewise with phone calls, what's the culture around a remote team? Are you more likely to pick up a phone, or you're more likely to send a Slack message for, say, a difficult conversation? What does the culture look like around that? And this is led by your leadership team. Likewise with video, we all have talked about the Zooms, we love Zooms. What does the culture look like in a remote team with video calls? Some teams, it's rude not to have the video turned on. Other teams, it's a bit weird to have the video turned on. So what does that culture look like? And is that discussed? How do team feel about that? I personally do like the video turned off. It saves me having to fix myself up in the background. But hey, each to their own. But these are micro cultures inside your comms that you do need to be conscious of in a remote team, and how you decide how to roll it out in your company. And the last piece is face-to-face. So does your team meet up? How often is it? For 6pivot, we meet twice a year. I think Octopus meet once or twice also. And I think I'm very pleased to share that 6pivot have just gotten an office in South Bank. So we're moving towards something like having a space that people can go to if they want to. So it's a dedicated space. Maybe you can leave your things there for a week, maybe your backpack or something, or a coat. But somewhere to go to meet your teams, catch up, or have impromptu meetings. But what does the culture look like around each of these styles of comms inside a remote team is important, and how you roll them out, and especially around difficult conversations. So just off a little tangent here, but a real quick tidbit. Have you heard of developer readmes? Maybe there was a kind of popular blog a little while ago, because comm styles are different amongst devs. Your comm style, you might prefer getting difficult feedback over messages. You might prefer difficult feedback over face-to-face. What is your preferred style? It's important for both parties to know, right? So there's a really important developer readmes Medium blog that went out a little while ago that showed a lot of leadership team, so Netflix, some of the guys from GitHub and HubSpot, etc. And they showed what their developer readmes are, and they covered most of these aspects. So it's really great for team onboarding to know what's their preferred style of, say, feedback, most importantly. And that's kind of what I'm going to drill down on here, because I think in a remote team, when it comes to feedback, this is something that we consciously need to think of in remote teams, as opposed to teams that see each other every day. Because those little nuances, seeing your physical reactions, can help with that emotional journey. But remote is something that we need to focus on a little more. So, difficult conversations are tough to initiate remote, formally or informally. They might just be something really casual with your teammate, or it might be something larger like a performance development or something like that. But they're tough to initiate because it's purposeful. You need to create the calendar invitation, and it needs to be communicated early on. So what does that look like? So I really think honest conflict has more value than dishonest harmony. So being nice and avoiding difficult truths makes you a bad colleague. Yep. And you need to know this in a remote team innately, and it needs to be deeply ingrained in your culture, I believe. So I really think for remote teams to really thrive, that you need to create a feedback environment. I think they kind of encompass these 4 things. Admittedly, I've taken a lot of this of my training has come from Apple, so hey, this is a little bit of Apple background as well. But inviting feedback often, and I do think that this comes from leadership downwards. You can't roll out a cultural change or a feedback culture without leadership modeling that behaviour first within a remote team. So inviting feedback often, I've opened up the doors to say, hey, give me that feedback. Secondly, assuming positive intent. So this goes both ways. So for the leadership team, to assume positive intent when this person's giving you maybe difficult feedback, or vice versa, if you're delivering difficult feedback to somebody, that they're assuming positive intent. And this is actually sometimes unnatural, and you have to actively do this. Second piece is seeking to understand. So maybe somebody's late to jump on a Zoom call. You want to make sure that, hey, your first reaction should be, and I hope to be, is everything okay? There shouldn't be an assumption of you're slacking off. So that type of behaviour, you don't know what that person's going through behind that computer screen. Maybe their dog died that day and they haven't communicated it yet. And the last piece is thanking the feedback. It is difficult to have a difficult conversation in a remote team. And nobody really wants to hurt somebody's feelings, but you want to be a good colleague and give them that useful feedback. And so if somebody has given you feedback, you must thank them, because it encourages the behaviour. I'm ready to accept that and I want to hear more of it. So you really need to understand in a remote team, when you're doing difficult conversations, that you want to confront a pattern of behaviour, not a person. This is not a personal thing. This is a professional thing, and it's a behavioural thing that we want to look at. So the strategy behind this is usually behaviour impact. So hypothetically, maybe somebody is late to this, joining their team meetings, So the behaviour is, hey John, you're consistently 10 minutes late to meetings. This leaves the team waiting a little bit longer and is inconsistent for our scheduling. So instead of saying, hey John, you kind of suck. And so it's a little bit more purposeful. Or likewise, this works also, I really believe in a recognition culture. So likewise, with Mike's presentation today, hey Mike, I really liked where you talked about the tuning piece. That's really memorable for me, and that analogy will stick with me for a long time. And so instead of me saying to Mike, hey Mike, really liked your prezzo, that's really great feedback, but that specific feedback, telling him about the impact on me, will really resonate with him and he'll remember it for a bit longer. But we also have to remember, when you're doing feedback, you've got to allow for a nuanced truth. Accept that your opinions and perceptions are fallible, and don't act like your opinion is the truth. It's your perception, and you can come together and you can discuss it. And I think when you have this type of robust conversations in remote teams about feedback, especially difficult conversations, your company can thrive if it's encompassing these 3 things. So radical trust, your radical transparency, and great comms in a remote team, really top notch, but it's something that you always have to work on. It's not something that you can roll out one time. It's something that you will consistently keep doing and consistently keep working on, because you're tuning your culture. And that's me.